My boyfriend insisted I go to his company holiday party. Not asked, not suggested, insisted, like my presence was a required badge he needed to clip onto his suit jacket for the night. And the reason he gave me still makes my stomach tighten when I replay it. A month before the RSVP deadline, Damien sat across from me on our couch, barefoot, calm, almost casually brave, and told me something he probably should have mentioned sooner. At his very first Christmas party at that staffing company, before we met, he'd gotten drunk and hooked up with two women from his office. Not two random strangers. Two women who still worked there.
Sino nila for?
The other in a different department, but around. And both would be at this party. He said it the way someone reads out a grocery list. No embarrassment, no apology, just information. Like he was being mature and transparent, and I was supposed to clap for the honesty. I remember blinking at him, trying to make my face do something neutral while my brain did the frantic math. Dinner table, open bar, hotel rooms, gossip, smirks, eyes on me, eyes on him. I told him quietly, I'd rather skip it. I said I could stay home, he could go have fun, we'd meet up after. I tried to sound supportive, like this was about scheduling, not the fact that I'd be forced to smile politely at people who had been in bed with my boyfriend, while the whole room pretended it was just office culture. Damien's expression hardened. He said I was being immature. He said I was making him feel judged for something that happened before I even existed in his life. And then he hit me with the sentence that turned my discomfort into a moral failure. You're hurting my career. That's when I realized this wasn't only about a party. It was about power, image, and how far he expected me to bend, to protect the version of him he needed his coworkers to see. And I didn't yet know the worst part. I would end up going. The party would seem fine. And then, days later, one of those women would make a comment at work that proved my fear hadn't been paranoia at all. My name is Asha. I'm 31, and I've built my adult life the way you build a sturdy shelf. Slow, measured, checking the screws twice, because I don't like things collapsing in the middle of the night. I manage client accounts for a mid-sized software company. Deadlines, meetings, follow-up emails, the constant polite pressure of keeping people happy without letting them walk over you. I'm the kind of person who keeps a calm tone even when my pulse is punching at my throat. I've learned that if you stay steady long enough, people either mirror you or reveal themselves. I met Damien when I was 28, at a friend's birthday dinner in a crowded little restaurant where the tables were so close you could hear strangers breaking up 2 seats over. He wasn't the loudest man in the room. He didn't need to be. Damien had that confident stillness, like he assumed life would make space for him, and most of the time it did. He wore a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and he listened with the kind of attention that makes you feel chosen. When I spoke, his eyes stayed on me, not drifting, not scanning. I remember thinking, finally, someone who's actually here. He asked for my number as we walked out, and he didn't do the thing where men pretend to be casual while secretly hoping you'll chase. He texted me that night. Home safe? I'd like to see you again. Simple, direct, no games. Our first months were easy, the kind of easy that feels like relief. He worked for a large staffing company, big offices, lots of internal politics, lots of talk about growth and brand. He liked order. He liked measurable progress. When we started dating, he made it feel intentional, like he'd selected us, and now he was going to build it. I liked that, because I'm not someone who wants chaos dressed up as passion. By 6 months, he had a drawer at my place. By a year, we were splitting weekends between my friends and his coworkers' get-togethers. By 18 months, the words marriage and kids stopped being theoretical. I won't pretend everything was perfect. Nothing real is, but the problems we had were the normal ones, whose family we'd visit on holidays, how late he stayed at the office, my habit of withdrawing when I felt overwhelmed. We had one big difference, though, one that Damien always insisted was just perspective. Sex. Damien was open about his past early on, like it was a sign of maturity. He told me he'd been with a lot of people. He didn't say the number at first, but later it landed somewhere over 50. It wasn't bragging exactly, more like a neutral statistic, like he was telling me how many cities he'd visited. I had been with 7. Every person I'd slept with had been someone I was dating, someone I cared about. For me, sex was never just a hobby. It came with meaning, even when I didn't want it to. Damien, on the other hand, could separate everything. He'd talk about hookups like they were weather, something that happened, something you moved on from. And because I loved him, because he was honest, because he never made me feel small for my number, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I told myself we were compatible where it counted. Loyalty, plans, daily life. We paid our bills. We cooked dinner together. We watched dumb shows and argued about which takeout place was best. We were building. His family was more complicated. His mother liked me in that performative way. Warm smile, thin eyes. She'd compliment my dress and then ask, "So when are you giving Damien children?" Like it was a job interview question. His sister treated me like I was temporary until proven otherwise, and his dad was the type who measured worth in titles and promotions. It meant something to Damien that they approved, and it meant something to him, more than he liked to admit, that his coworkers saw him as stable, successful, and settled. Like having a serious girlfriend was a badge that proved he was grown. That's why the company holiday party mattered. Not because he wanted to dance with me, not because he wanted to share a fun night, but because the party was a stage and Damien wanted to walk onto it with me on his arm, smiling, so everyone could see the picture he'd been selling. And when he finally told me the truth about that first Christmas party, about the two women, the hotel room, the drunken night that apparently meant nothing, it wasn't just the story that bothered me. It was the timing. He told me right when my attendance became important, right when saying no would make me the problem. And that was the first moment I wondered, quietly, privately, had I been a partner or had I been a prop? Once Damien told me about the two women, something subtle but corrosive settled into our apartment. Nothing exploded. There was no dramatic fight right away. Instead, the air changed, like when you realize a room has a draft but you can't find the window. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way Damien talked about work became strategic, not excited, not stressed, calculated. He'd mention names more often, who was moving up, who had visibility, who the regional managers liked. He talked about the holiday party like it was a chessboard, not a celebration. "This is where people actually talk," he said one night while scrolling through his phone. "Executives loosen up. You get FaceTime you don't get in meetings." I nodded, stirring pasta that had already gone soft, wondering when I'd stopped being a girlfriend and started being a networking asset. I told him again that I didn't want to go. Not angrily, not dramatically, just honestly. "I'm not trying to punish you," I said. "I just don't want to spend an evening sitting across from women you slept with while everyone drinks and pretends it's not awkward." Damien exhaled slowly, the way he did when he thought I was being unreasonable but wanted to sound patient. "You're making assumptions," he said. "No one cares about that anymore." That sentence stuck with me, because if no one cared, why had he warned me? Why bring it up at all? When I asked him that, he said he was being respectful, transparent, that I should appreciate that he trusted me enough to tell me the truth. I wanted to, I really did. But transparency doesn't cancel impact. And respect doesn't mean ignoring how someone feels after you drop the truth in their lap and expect them to carry it gracefully. Over the next few days, the conversations kept looping. Same words, same arguments, different tones. He said I was acting insecure. I said I was setting a boundary. He said I was shaming him for his past. I said I wasn't judging his history. I just didn't want to be immersed in it over cocktails. He reminded me that I had skipped the last two parties. The first year, we were too new. The second year, I'd had a deadline. And now this, he said. At some point, it stops being coincidence, Asha. That hurt more than I expected. Because I had supported him. I'd listened to endless venting about office politics. I'd proofread emails. I'd rearranged holidays around his schedule. I just hadn't wanted to play girlfriend on display in a room where his sexual history was part of the company lore. That's when he said it. "This matters for my career." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, voice tight. "I've been working toward a promotion for over a year. Everyone brings their partner. Showing up alone after 3 years together sends the wrong message." "What message?" I asked. "That we're unstable," he said. "That you don't support me, that I'm not settled." Settled? Like I was furniture. He went on, explaining how senior leadership paid attention to optics, how promotions weren't just about performance, but about who looked reliable, put together, married adjacent. And suddenly, my discomfort wasn't just inconvenient. It was career sabotage. I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling while Damien slept facing the wall. My chest felt tight, but my thoughts were worse. Was I being unfair? Was I letting my own hang-ups dictate something that truly mattered to him? Or was I being asked to swallow something that crossed a line and pretend it tasted fine? The apartment grew quieter over the week. No good morning kisses. No lazy couch cuddles. We ate dinner side by side, phones in hand, skirting the topic we both knew would resurface the second one of us breathed wrong. The RSVP deadline loomed, and with it, the unspoken question. Would I bend or would I break the image he needed me to protect? The night everything tipped wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet in the way that hurts more, because it made me feel like I was the only one struggling to breathe. It was a Friday. The RSVP deadline was Monday. Damien came home later than usual, loosened his tie, and set his phone down on the counter like it was already exhausted from the day. I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop open, pretending to work while actually rereading the same paragraph for the 10th time. Can we just talk? He asked. Not argue, not debate, talk. I closed my laptop. We sat across from each other like we were negotiating something fragile and expensive. I've been thinking about why this bothers you so much, Damien said, folding his hands, and I don't get it. The honesty in that sentence stung. It's the party, I said carefully. Not your past, not your coworkers existing. The party, alcohol, people loosening up, jokes that don't land, looks I don't see but still feel. He frowned. Do you think I'd cheat on you? No, I said immediately. Absolutely not. Do you think they'd hit on me? With you standing there? No. Then what's the problem? I opened my mouth and realized how thin my answer sounded even to me. I don't want to feel like the room knows something about you that I'm supposed to pretend doesn't exist. He leaned back. That sounds like insecurity. Maybe it is, I admitted, but it's real. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that shifted the weight of the conversation entirely. We're talking about getting engaged. I felt my throat tighten. If you can't handle one uncomfortable evening, he continued, how are we supposed to handle the harder things? Work events for years, people from my past showing up, life not being neat. I hated how reasonable it sounded. Hated that he wasn't yelling. Hated that he wasn't cruel. Hated that I couldn't dismiss it as manipulation because it felt logical. I'm not asking you to erase your feelings, he said. I'm asking you to show up for me. That word, show up, sat heavy between us. Because showing up meant smiling. Showing up meant holding his hand while my mind cataloged every glance. Showing up meant swallowing my discomfort and calling it maturity. I need the weekend to think, I said finally. He nodded. The deadline's Monday. I spent the next 2 days spiraling quietly. I replayed our conversations. I imagined the dinner tables, the bar, the introductions. I imagined myself laughing too loud, nodding too much, trying not to look like I was bracing for impact. I also imagined Damien not getting the promotion. Imagined him resenting me. Imagined this becoming the story he told himself about why things stalled. By Sunday night, the guilt won. I told him I'd go. He didn't celebrate, didn't hug me. He just looked relieved, like a pressure valve had released. Thank you, he said. And that was it. The week leading up to the party, the tension dissolved like it had never existed. Damien was lighter, more affectionate. He talked about the schedule, the dress code, who I should meet. He told me the names of the 2 women, names I hadn't asked for. I memorized them anyway. The hotel was nicer than I expected. Polished floors, soft lighting, the kind of place where everything smelled faintly expensive. At the cocktail hour, Damien introduced me to everyone. 30 people in the first hour. Handshakes, smiles. This is my girlfriend, repeated like a title. People were kind, curious. Some said they'd heard about me. That made my skin prickle. At dinner, Damien leaned over and murmured, "They're here." I followed his gaze. One sat behind us with a man I assumed was her partner. The other was across the room, laughing loudly, gesturing with her drink. They didn't look like the villains I'd imagined, which somehow made it worse. Damien reached for my hand under the table, something he rarely did in public. I squeezed back, not sure whether I was comforting him or myself. The night passed without incident. No jokes, no comments, no looks that lingered too long. I talked to senior leadership. I smiled. I drank 1 glass of wine and switched to water. By midnight, I was exhausted, but okay. Back in the hotel room, Damien asked, "You good?" "I'm fine," I said. And I meant it. Which is why what happened next, days later, felt like the floor giving way after I'd already convinced myself it was solid. It was Wednesday evening. Damien came home from work, quieter than usual. He set his bag down slowly and didn't take off his shoes. "One of the women from the party," he said, not meeting my eyes, "made a comment today." My chest tightened instantly. "She said she hoped you weren't the jealous type," he continued, and then mentioned that people at the office still joke about that first Christmas party. I stared at him. All the things he'd dismissed. All the things he'd told me didn't matter. They'd been real. And suddenly, the night that had seemed harmless felt like a lie I'd been too polite to question. For a few seconds after Damien said it, I couldn't speak. It felt like my body had reacted before my mind caught up. My shoulders tightening, my jaw locking, my heartbeat thudding loud enough that I was sure he could hear it. She said what? I finally asked. Damien exhaled and ran a hand through his hair. She said it was nice to meet you. Then she laughed and said she hoped you weren't the jealous type. I asked what she meant. That's when she told me. People still talk about that first party. Sometimes they joke about it. The room felt smaller. Not because of the information, but because of the confirmation. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated. I hadn't been immature. People knew. People remembered. People watched. And I'd walked straight into it wearing a polite smile and a dress I'd chosen carefully so I wouldn't look like the insecure girlfriend. What did you say? I asked. I told her it wasn't appropriate, he said quickly. I told her to keep those comments to herself. I nodded, staring at the edge of the table. My fingers traced the wood grain without meaning to. A part of me wanted to explode, to say I told you so, to list every moment he'd dismissed me, every time he'd framed my discomfort as a personal flaw instead of a situational response. But another part of me, the one that had learned how to survive conflict by staying composed, kept my voice level. So, I said, you see now why I was worried. Yes, he admitted, I do. That word, admitted, should have felt satisfying. It didn't. It felt hollow, because the damage wasn't undone by being right. What bothers me the most, I said slowly, isn't even what she said. It's that you made me feel like I was the problem for anticipating it. Damien's shoulders dropped. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have dismissed you. I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't defensive. He wasn't angry. He looked unsettled, like something he'd confidently minimized had come back and tapped him on the shoulder. I didn't regret going, I continued. I got through it, but I went because I trusted you when you said it didn't matter, and now I find out it did, just not to you. He nodded. I think I downplayed it, or stopped thinking about it altogether. And I was the one who had to absorb it, I said quietly. We sat with that for a moment. Then Damien said something that surprised me. I talked to both of them. My eyes snapped back to his. I told them, separately, that any jokes or references to that night needed to stop, especially if you're around. And they agreed, no pushback. That should have reassured me. Instead, it unsettled me, because it meant this had been an unspoken understanding all along. A joke with rules, a story with a shelf life that only expired when I entered the frame. I don't regret what happened, Damien said carefully. I don't want you to think I'm ashamed of it, but I see now that it put you in a position you didn't consent to. I swallowed. I don't need you to be ashamed, I said. I need you to stop acting like my feelings are an obstacle instead of information. He reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. I hear you, he said. I should have taken it seriously from the start. That night, we talked more openly than we had in weeks. About how gossip lingers longer than people admit. About how different our wiring around sex really was. About how I hadn't thought enough about what it was like for him to have his past follow him at work, and how he hadn't thought enough about what it meant to drag me into that environment without preparing me honestly. I deal with it every day, he said quietly. People making assumptions, reducing me to that story. I looked at him then with something closer to compassion than resentment. And I dealt with it for one night, I said, and it nearly broke us. We agreed on something important before we went to bed. If anything like this came up again, anything that touched old wounds, old stories, unspoken dynamics, we wouldn't let it fester. We wouldn't let it turn into a week of silence and side eyes and swallowed resentment. We'd talk, early, clearly. For a while it worked. The tension eased. The apartment felt like ours again. We cooked. We laughed. We made plans for the holidays. I thought the worst of it was over. I didn't know yet that the party wasn't the real fracture. It was just the place where the crack became visible. For about a month after the party, things felt repaired. Not perfect, but steady. Like we'd patched a leak before it flooded the house. Damien got the promotion in early January. Senior account manager. Better title, better pay, more responsibility. He came home that night grinning in a way I hadn't seen in a while, and I hugged him hard, genuinely proud. I meant it when I said I was happy for him. He worked longer hours after that, more meetings, more quick drinks with the team. I told myself it was normal. Promotions come with momentum, with visibility, with expectations. I didn't want to be the girlfriend who made everything about herself. So when he texted one Tuesday evening, out with coworkers celebrating, "Don't wait up," I replied with a heart and went back to my book. I remembered later that he hadn't said which coworkers. I remembered it because a week after that, we went out for drinks with people from my office. It was casual, loud bar near downtown, sticky floors, half the group already tipsy when we arrived. Damien knew most of them. He'd met them at previous get-togethers, knew who liked sports, who hated their boss, who drank too fast. One of my coworkers, Tom, had had too much to drink. Tom is the kind of man who confuses honesty with entitlement once alcohol loosens his mouth. He pulled me aside near the jukebox, eyes glassy, voice lowered like he was doing me a favor. "I don't want to start anything," he said, swaying slightly, "but I feel like you should know something." My stomach sank. He told me he'd seen Damien at a bar a couple of weeks earlier, downtown, with a group from work. He said Damien had spent most of the night talking to one woman in particular. He said they looked close. Not overtly sexual, not scandalous, but comfortable in a way that made him pause. At one point, Tom added, she had her hand on his lower back, just for a second, but still. I asked when this was. He said maybe 2 Tuesdays ago. I asked if he was sure it was Damien. He said yes, no hesitation. I thanked him for telling me, even though my chest felt like it had collapsed inward. I went back to the table and smiled through the rest of the night like my insides weren't vibrating with unease. When we got home, I asked Damien about it. I kept my voice neutral, casual. "Did you go out for drinks with your team a couple Tuesdays ago?" "Yes," he said easily, "to celebrate the promotion." "Who was there?" He listed names. One of them made my pulse spike. A woman from his team, the same woman who'd made the jealous type comment. I asked if she was the one he'd talked to the most. He paused, just long enough to register. "Why are you asking?" he said. So I told him what Tom had said. The change in Damien's expression was immediate, guarded, tight. "He misread it," Damien said. "We talked a lot because she was asking me about applying for a position in another region. That's it." "And the hand on your back?" "That happened once," he said. "Someone bumped into us. It was nothing." I believed that part. What bothered me was something else. "Why didn't you mention you were out with her?" I asked. "I told you I was out with coworkers," he replied. "Yes, but you didn't mention her." He shrugged, because it wasn't relevant. That answer sat wrong. Not explosive wrong, quiet wrong, like a note slightly off key. I asked if anything else had happened between them since the party. "No," he said, "we're professional." I asked if they'd spent time together outside work. "Only group things," he said quickly, "work-related." The way he emphasized it made my skin prickle. We didn't yell, we didn't accuse. But we didn't resolve it either. We went to bed with our backs turned, the mattress a quiet border between us. The next morning I apologized. I told him I trusted him, that I shouldn't have interrogated him based on one drunk comment. He accepted the apology, but something shifted. He left earlier than usual, came home later. His phone stayed face down more often. I tried to let it go. I failed. The thought kept circling. Why hadn't he just told me? And then I did something I had always said I wouldn't do. On a Saturday morning, while Damien was in the shower, I picked up his phone. I hate admitting that. I hate how my hands shook as I unlocked it. I hate how part of me already knew I'd find something. Not a smoking gun, but enough to justify the fear. There were hundreds of messages between him and her. Mostly work, but also jokes, memes, check-ins, inside references I didn't understand. He called her his favorite person in the office. She replied with a heart. Nothing explicit. Nothing damning. And somehow worse. This wasn't just proximity. It was intimacy. Damien walked out of the bathroom and froze when he saw me. "What are you doing?" he asked. I showed him the phone. He was furious. Rightfully. He said I'd violated his trust, that I had no right. He was right. But I asked the question that had been burning through me. "Why didn't you tell me you were this close?" He said he hadn't hidden anything, that he didn't announce every friendship, that I'd already decided she was a problem, and he didn't want to manage my reactions. And that, I said, my voice shaking, is the problem. Because he had managed it. By keeping it separate. By letting a relationship grow in the dark while telling me nothing was wrong. The argument lasted hours. He said I was controlling. I said I was responding to secrecy. He said his past only mattered because I wouldn't let it go. I said context mattered because it changed boundaries. We slept in separate rooms. And when morning came, we weren't closer to clarity. We were closer to a line neither of us knew how to step back from. The apartment had never felt so quiet. Not peaceful, hollow. For 2 weeks after that fight, Damien and I existed in the same space like strangers who happened to know each other's routines. We were polite, careful. We said good morning, and "Did you eat?" and "I'll be late tonight." The words were functional, stripped of warmth. He slept on the couch. I slept in the bed we'd picked out together, staring at the ceiling where the light from passing cars slid across like slow-moving shadows. I hated that I noticed everything now. The way his phone buzzed and he checked it quickly. The way he angled the screen away, not dramatically, just instinctively. The way he came home later, tired in a way that felt emotional, not physical. I hated that my mind filled the silence with questions I didn't want answers to. I also hated myself for breaking my own rule, never snoop, never cross that line, and then being unable to unknow what I'd seen. Nothing had technically happened, and yet something had shifted so deeply that it felt irreversible. I started browsing apartments during lunch breaks. Not seriously, not with intent. Just looking. Studios, one-bedrooms, places I could afford alone. I imagined where I'd put my books, where the couch would go, what it would feel like to come home without measuring my tone or wondering who he'd texted last. The thought scared me. The thought relieved me, both at the same time. One evening, Damien came home early. He stood in the kitchen while I was chopping vegetables, the sound of the knife too loud in the space between us. "We can't keep doing this," he said. I set the knife down slowly. He sat at the table. I joined him. The chairs scraped the floor like punctuation marks. "I've been thinking," he said, "a lot." I braced myself. He told me the truth I'd been circling but hadn't heard out loud yet, that his friendship with her had gotten too close, too fast, that he'd underestimated how it looked, that he'd leaned on her emotionally in ways he should have leaned on me. I felt my chest tighten, not with shock, but with grief. "I never touched her," he said quickly. "Nothing physical happened." I believed him, which almost made it worse, because it meant the betrayal wasn't about bodies. It was about attention. "I talked to her," he continued. "I told her we need to pull back, that I need to prioritize us." He showed me his phone. He'd deleted most of their messages. He'd told her they should keep things professional. No more personal texting. No lunches alone. No after-work drinks. I didn't know how to feel. Relief tangled with resentment. "Why did it take this long?" I asked. He didn't have a clean answer. He said it felt good to be understood without judgment. That after years of people at work reducing him to his past, having someone who didn't care about that history felt validating. I pointed out quietly that I hadn't judged him either. He nodded. "I know, but it was different." That sentence hurt more than anything else he'd said. We talked for hours that night. We laid everything out. The party, my reluctance, his frustration, the promotion, the bar, the messages, the phone. We took responsibility in pieces. He apologized for dismissing my concerns. I apologized for invading his privacy. He acknowledged the secrecy. I acknowledged my growing mistrust. By the end, we were exhausted, raw, fragile. He asked, "Do you still want to be with me?" I said yes, but it didn't feel like a promise. It felt like a question. Over the next few days, things improved on the surface. He kept his word. He came home earlier. He put his phone down more often. He told me about his day in detail, almost too much detail, like he was trying to rebuild trust brick by brick. And yet, something inside me stayed braced. When his phone buzzed, my stomach tightened. When he mentioned a female coworker, my mind filled in blanks I didn't want. I hated that version of myself. I hated that I'd become someone who watched instead of trusted. One night, lying in bed, Damien offered something I hadn't expected. "You can check my phone any time," he said quietly. "I have nothing to hide." I turned to look at him. The offer was meant to comfort me. Instead, it terrified me, because it meant he could feel the distance, the suspicion, the quiet measuring I hadn't meant to show. "I don't want to check your phone," I said. "I want to trust you without needing to." He nodded. But the space between us remained. A few nights later, as we lay in the dark, he asked softly, "Do you still see a future with me?" I answered yes, immediately. Too quickly. He didn't respond right away. And in that silence, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. We weren't broken, but we weren't whole anymore either. And love alone wasn't enough to bridge the gap trust had left behind. The turning point didn't come with a fight. It came with a question. We were lying in bed on a Tuesday night, the lights off, the room lit only by the faint glow of Damien's phone as he scrolled absently. I was staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between his breaths like it meant something. Out of nowhere, he asked, "Do you think we're actually going to get past this?" I rolled onto my side to face him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, really past it. Not just functioning, not just being polite." His voice wasn't accusatory. It was tired, honest in a way that scared me more than anger ever could. "I don't know," I admitted. The words tasted like failure. He exhaled slowly. "I feel like you're watching me, like you're waiting for me to mess up." I'm trying not to, I said, but I don't know how to unsee what I saw. He nodded, and I don't know how to be in a relationship where every action gets measured. That was the moment the power shifted. Not because either of us won, but because we both stopped pretending this was just a rough patch. We talked until nearly 2 in the morning, about compatibility, about whether love was enough when your wiring around trust and boundaries didn't match. He said something that finally clicked everything into place. I need someone who can fully accept my past without it becoming an ongoing source of tension. The room went quiet. Because the truth was, I couldn't promise that. Not honestly. I could accept his past in theory. But in practice, when it intersected with my present, my body reacted before my logic could intervene. And he needed ease, not effort. I said the thing I'd been circling for weeks. I don't think either of us is wrong, I said, but I think we're asking each other to become people we're not. He stared at the ceiling. I don't want to lose you, he said. I don't want to lose myself, I replied. That was it. No screaming, no accusations. Just clarity. Over the next few days, we talked logistics. Not in a cold way, but in the careful tone of two people handling something fragile. Our lease was up in 3 months. We'd talked about finding a bigger place, maybe buying. Now, we agreed not to make any big decisions until we knew whether we were moving toward each other or away. I started therapy, not because he asked, because I needed to understand why this cut so deeply. My therapist didn't tell me I was insecure or wrong. She asked a different question. What boundary of yours was crossed, and when did you start ignoring yourself to keep the peace? That question stayed with me. I realized I hadn't been upset about the party alone. I'd been upset about being asked to suppress my instincts for the sake of optics, about being told my discomfort was immaturity, about being made responsible for maintaining an image that wasn't mine. And Damien realized something too, that his ability to compartmentalize sex, friendship, work was a strength for him, but a strain for us. One evening, he came home with a seriousness that felt final. I've been thinking about what you said, he told me, about not wanting to lose yourself. I waited. I don't want to be the reason you become someone who's always bracing, he continued, and I don't want to live in a relationship where I feel constantly evaluated. We didn't say the word. We didn't have to. The decision formed in the space between us, heavy and inevitable. That night, we held each other longer than we had in months. Not with urgency, with grief. We weren't ending things because there was no love. We were ending them because love wasn't enough to undo the mismatch we'd exposed. The next morning, we made coffee like always. We talked about dividing things fairly, about timing, about how to tell our families, about what we'd learned. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to relief. Not because it didn't hurt, but because I wasn't fighting myself anymore. The fallout didn't come all at once. It came in quiet waves, emails, conversations, small moments where the reality of our decision echoed back at us in ways we couldn't control. Damien moved out 3 weeks before the lease ended. Not dramatically, not angrily. We planned it together like two people who still respected each other, but had finally stopped pretending respect was enough to substitute for alignment. The day he packed his things, the apartment felt strangely neutral, like it had already accepted the change before we had. He folded his clothes carefully, labeled boxes, took the plants he'd brought in, left the coffee machine because he knew I used it more. At the door, he hesitated. I never meant to make you feel small, he said. I know, I replied, but intention doesn't erase impact. He nodded, and then he was gone. The first week alone was disorienting. I kept expecting to hear his keys, to feel the mattress dip, to get texts about groceries or meetings running late. Instead, there was silence. And then, clarity. Without the constant low-grade tension, my body finally relaxed. My shoulders dropped. My sleep deepened. The mental inventory I'd been running for months shut off. That told me more than any argument ever could. The fallout reached Damien's world faster than mine. His coworkers noticed my absence. Questions followed. At first, he gave vague answers. Timing. Different priorities. The polite phrases people use when they don't want to offer details. But work has a way of stripping privacy. The woman who'd made the jealous-type comment, the same one he'd set boundaries with, made another one, this time to someone else, about how things had been tense since the party. It reached management. Not as gossip, but as concern. HR doesn't like blurred boundaries. They like predictability, stability. Damien found himself having to clarify things he'd once brushed off. He didn't lose his job. He didn't lose his promotion. But the narrative shifted. Where he'd once been seen as polished and settled, he was now quietly categorized as complicated. I didn't take pleasure in that. I didn't need to. The truth has its own momentum. His mother called me 2 weeks later. She didn't ask how I was. She asked what had happened. When I explained, calmly, without accusation, there was a pause on the line. Then, I thought you were stronger than that. That hurt, but it also freed me. I said. That's why I left. She didn't call again. My family reacted differently. My sister hugged me and said, I'm proud of you for listening to yourself. My father said, if you're losing sleep, it's not the right place. Simple, grounded, no moral math. Damien and I met once more, a month later, to exchange the last few items and close a shared account. We sat at a cafe we used to love. He looked tired, not devastated, not broken, just recalibrating. I didn't realize how much I asked you to carry, he admitted. And I didn't realize how much I ignored myself, I said. We smiled at that. No bitterness, just truth. The fallout wasn't punishment. It was consequence. He went on to date someone from a different social world, someone who didn't intersect with his work life, someone who shared his ease with compartmentalization. I moved into a smaller place closer to my office. It wasn't a step back. It was a step inward. The most surprising part of the fallout wasn't the loss. It was the absence of regret. I missed him sometimes, but I never missed the version of myself I'd been becoming. A year later, I walked past the hotel where Damien's company had held that Christmas party. The lights were on. The lobby was full. People in suits and dresses laughed too loudly, glasses already half empty. I paused for a moment, watching from across the street, and I felt nothing. No spike of anxiety, no tight chest, no urge to measure myself against a room full of strangers. Just distance, not the painful kind, the healed kind. Leaving Damien didn't make me anti-love or suspicious of men or afraid of commitment. It made me honest. Honest about what I can live with. Honest about what I won't shrink myself to tolerate. I learned something important from that relationship. Discomfort isn't always insecurity. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's your instincts noticing a misalignment before your logic is ready to admit it. I also learned that compatibility isn't about shared dreams. It's about shared thresholds. What feels neutral to one person can feel violating to another. Neither is wrong. But forcing one to adapt endlessly will always cost something. Damien wasn't a villain, and I wasn't weak. We were just two people asking each other to bend in opposite directions, and eventually realizing that bending isn't the same as growing. Now, when someone asks me what I'm looking for, I don't talk about marriage timelines or career ambition or how many people they've slept with. I talk about boundaries, about how they respond when I say, this doesn't feel okay to me. Do they get curious, or do they get defensive? Because the way someone treats your discomfort will tell you more about your future than any promise ever could. If you're listening to this and wondering whether you're being too sensitive or making a big deal out of nothing, I want you to hear this. If something keeps pulling at you quietly, don't drown it out with logic. Don't let anyone reframe your limits as immaturity. Love should feel expansive, not like you're holding your breath at a party, smiling through something you never agreed to carry. Sometimes walking away isn't failure. Sometimes it's the most self-respecting ending you can give yourself. Thank you for listening.